Rashie Coatie. This is a Scottish version of a weel kent story. I wonder if you can guess what it is. Rashie Coatie was a king's daughter, and the king often wanted her to get married. But Rashie Coatie didn't like a man that he'd chosen for her. So she gaed to the henwife to speir if the henwife could gie her ony advice. And the woman said, "Well, Rashie Coatie, just you ask your feather to gie you a coat made fae beaten goud." And that's what the princess did. And recht awa, the king had a magnificent coat made wi' beaten goud. But Rashie Coatie still didn't want to marry the man. So she gaed back to the henwife to speir for more advice. And the henwife said, "Well, this time ask your feather for a coat made wi' the feathers o' ilky bird in the world." And Rashie Coatie thought, that might be a bit harder. So she gaed to her feather and she speired for sic a coat. And at once a king sent for men to ging and gather the feathers o' ilky bird in the world. They would pit out oats lying in the grun, and for ilky grain that the birdies picked, they had to leave a feather. And afore long, the coat was made. But still Rashie Coatie didn't want to marry the man. So she gaed back to the henwife again. And the henwife said, "All right, ask your feather for a coat and a pair of slippers made fae rashes." And that's what she did. And the king straight awa got the coat and the slippers made. But still Rashie Coatie didn't want to marry the man. So she gaed again to the henwife. And this time the woman said, "I canna help you, queen." And so Rashie Coatie thought she had nae choice but ging as far awa as she could. She'd hate her in awa fae hame. So she gaed far, far, farrer than she'd ever been afore, until she come to another kingdom. And she come to the king's house there, and she rapped on the door and she speired for a job. So they set her to do the dishes down in the kitchen. Well, this was fine. She'd a roof o'er her head and she'd food for her belly. There was nothing coming oot her. At least she wouldn't have to marry the own man. Well, it come Saturday, and seen it was Sunday, the Sabbath. And Abdi gaed awa to the kirk, apart fae Rashie Coatie, for they telled her to bide and look after the dinner. But when Abdi had gone, a wee fairy appeared. And the fairy said to Rashie Coatie, "Go and you awa and put on your coat a goud, your beaten goud, and ging to the kirk." And Rashie Coatie says, "Oh no, I canna do that. I've got to look after the dinner and make sure it's ready when Abdi comes back." Dinna worry," said the fairy. "I'll see to the dinner. You put on your coatie a goud and awa to the kirk." So Rashie Coatie said, "Ae peat, mak another peat burn. Ae spit, mak another spit turn. Ae pot, mak another pot play. Rashie Coatie's awa to the kirk a day." And awa she gaed. Well, when she sneaked in, she sat down at the back of the kirk, and she thought that nobody had noticed her. But the prince had seen her, and he thought she was the most beautiful queen he'd ever seen. He'd never seen anybody bonnier, and he fair fell in love with her. Well, he went to speak to her, but she was gone. She must have slipped out afore Abdi else at the end of the service. And that's exactly what she did, for she got home and ta'en off her coat o' goud and was busy about the pots when Abdi come home. And nobody even kent that she'd been out of the house as they sat down to their dinner. Well, the next Sunday, the same thing happened. Abdi gaed awa to the kirk, and a wee fairy come and said, "Rashie Coatie, go and put on your coat of feathers, and you ging awa to the kirk and a." "But I canna," she said. "I've got to look after the dinner and make sure that it's ready for Abdi coming back." "I'll look after the dinner," said the fairy. So Rashie Coatie put on her coat of feathers, and she said her wee song. She said, "Ae peat, muck ither peat burn. Ae spet, muck ither spet turn. Ae pot, muck ither pot play. Rashie Coatie's awa to the kirk a day." And again she went and sneaked in and sat down at the back of the kirk. And again the prince had his eye on her, and he was determined that he would catch her afore the end of the service. But somehow she managed to sneak out and get awa afore he could see far she'd gone. Well, she was back in the house and had a dinner on the table fin abdy got back for the kirk, so they never kent she was gone. Well, the next Sunday, when the fairy come, the fairy said, "Now put on your coat of rashes and your slippers and awa to the kirk, and I'll see to the dinner." So Rashie Coatie said, "All right," and she put on her coat of rashes and slipped on her rashes slippers, and she said, "Ae peat, muck the other peat burn. Ae spet, muck the other spet turn. Ae pot, muck the other pot play. Rashie Coatie's awa to the kirk a day." Well, this time, when she got in, she sat at the back as usual, but the prince had been a bit crafty, so he had sat in near the back so he could keep a better eye on her and catch her this time. But she got out that door quick as lightning when the service finished, and though the prince got after her, he couldn't catch up with her. Well, Rashie Coatie was running as fast, she'd drop it, her slippers. And so the prince found it lying there in the road. And afore long, he had put out a proclamation across the whole land. "I am going to marry the lass whose fits this slipper." Well, the ladies at the court come and tried on the Rashie slipper, but none of them could get their feet in it at all. The merchants' daughters tried, the farmers' daughters tried, the tradesmen's daughters tried. Every woman, it seemed, in the whole kingdom tried to get the slipper on, but to no avail. Well, the henwife, she heard about this, and she decided that her daughter should be the een that marries the prince, and so they went and tried to get her fit in. In fact, they nipped her fit and they clipped her fit so that it would fit in to the slipper. And when the prince seen that her fit had got into the slipper, he had no option but to take her back to the palace to marry her. Well, as he was riding along, they come up to this bit of wood, and on a branch of the tree there was a wee birdie, and the birdie was singing a wee song. "Nip it fit and clip it fit, ahin the king's loon rides. But bonny fit and true fit, ahin the cauldron hides." Well, the prince realised he'd been tricked, so he sent the henwife's daughter back, and he went recht to the kitchen and looked ahin the cauldron, and there was Rashie Coatie. And when she slipped her fit into the slipper, and it was a perfect fit, the prince announced they would be getting married. And they did. And I can tell you, they lived happily ever